Coming to you from Beverly Grove, Los Angeles, California, I'm Colin Marshall. This is the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. Today I'm sitting here in the garage of a guest, or I guess I'm his guest in a way. I'm in his garage, whom I've wanted to have on for a long time. He does a podcast, which is like this, a podcast with writers, but he does a podcast also of the kind that another of our guests on the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast does. In a way, he's like the literary version of Mark Maron. We've had Mark Maron on. Mark Maron is the Mark Maron of comedy. Brad Listi, my guest today, is, I would say, the Mark Maron of literature. He does the podcast Other People right here out of this garage with countless writers. He has in-depth personal conversations, the kind that go psychologically deep in a way that I think I often fail to. So I'm going to get some tips from him today on that. He's also the author of the novel, and I'm going to say this with the proper punctuation, Attention Deficit Disorder. He is the founder of The Nervous Breakdown, the literary and culture site I'm sure you've seen, and he's many other things besides, including a father for the second time just recently. Brad, tell me, how do you feel about that analogy, that you're the Mark Maron of literature? Is that accurate, or do you push back against it?
Oh, no. I mean, it's flattering. I should say, though, that the reason we're in my garage, which feels like very Maron derivative, is, first of all, I think the first 300 episodes of this show were recorded in my apartment proper. We then moved. My wife was pregnant with our second. That meant I got exiled to the garage. So I want to make sure that's clear. And then I would also say that a garage is like a natural place for this type of activity.
It seems that way. I mean, how much were you actively learning from the Mark Maron model, and how much of this is just coincidental similarity?
Oh, I learned a lot. I mean, I talked about this in a recent monologue. I think what I learned from Mark, most especially, is the way in which a podcast can help to build community in a creative, discipline. You know, like his show really became sort of like a meeting place for people in the comedy world. I think it's sort of branched out from there now to include the wider, entertainment industries, or whatever you want to call them. And I think seeing that made me feel inspired to do something similar for people in the literary realm. And, that's a big thing. I also think just his honesty. I mean, he's really good. I love his show, and he, like the confessional nature of it, the way in which he shares his own experiences and is able to draw out other people, on his show, obviously has been, hugely instructive and helpful and inspiring. And, there are others, which I just did a big monologue basically singing the praises of all my heroes, and, Howard Stern, Terry Gross, Ira Glass. I mean, kind of the usual suspects. All
honest people in their broadcast persona, though, you would say.
Yeah. I mean, I think the honesty's there. I mean, they're different. I feel like Howard, he's a comic performer in a way that obviously Terry and Ira are not, though they do have good sense of humor. Mark is obviously more explicitly comical in his approach, but I feel like Howard and Mark inject their personal story into their shows in ways that Terry and Ira do not. The NPR thing, you sort of are. It's sort of it's more traditional, where the host does not become a part of the show and their lives don't get tangled up in it. It's all about the guest, and I guess I'm more of the former and less of the latter.
Now, as I say, on Other People, you interview writers, just like I do here on the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast, and I wonder, this is an aspect of your show that's different from what I do, is that you are also a writer of fiction. I'm not. You're a writer of fiction talking most often to other writers of fiction. To what extent do you feel like you're engaging in not necessarily shop talk, but do you feel like you're beginning from a premise of shop talk? Like, a lot of times on your show, it's fascinating to hear you asking about what someone's writing routine is, or how they fit writing in, or what their elements of their process. How shop talky would you consider the way you approach a lot of these interviews?
To me, it almost feels more like a student. I feel more like a student doing the show. I learn a lot from my guests, and I have kind of an inquisitive. Anything that I'm inquisitive about in that regard feels like a student wanting to learn. But I also have experience trying to do this, and have written and published a book, and I struggle daily sitting in front of the keyboard trying to write the next book. And so I get it at that level. And I think anybody who's spent time trying to write a book and has seen it through understands what a challenge it can be. And so, I think I'm coming at it from an informed perspective, and I'm always curious to know how other people do it. And I've learned a lot over almost 400 episodes.
And the show, by the way, is called Other People, Not Other Writers. Was it always a focus for you to have writers on, or was it? I mean, I've read a bit about the origin of the title, that it was kind of a parody of People magazine. Here's Other People. I mean, were writers the focus from the moment you conceived of this show, though?
Yeah, I mean, that was always my community. And again, I think I was inspired. I mean, the podcasting thing, I wasn't that early. I was relatively early. I think things have really exploded over the past year or two, and this show is 4 years old. But even when I started, there were already a lot of podcasts out there, and Mark's, as you mentioned, was among them. And I think the sense of it was just like, writers need a show that does something that is a little bit more unorthodox. And I thought I would give it a shot. And I love radio. I was consuming a lot of this stuff as a listener, and just tried it. I'm a sucker for an experiment, and here we are 4 years later.
There's something conceptually really fascinating about your show as well. There's almost a stunt aspect, I find, that you're interviewing, as we say, all writers, but very often you go down a path that doesn't even lead to their book. Like they've got books out, but you want to find out, sometimes it seems to me, about everything but their book in a certain way, right?
That's the show. Yeah.
It's writers, but not the books.
Right. But I mean, sometimes the books. I mean, the books come up, and
they're not barred, but they don't come up naturally very often.
No, and some of it is a function of reality. Being the father of two young children, I was doing 2 shows a week until this past year with the second baby on the way. Now I'm doing 1. I'll probably go back to 2. It depends on time schedule and what my life will allow. But when it comes to the format of the show, a lot of it is dictated by just my personal taste. Some of it is dictated by necessity. So I have a writer coming in. I'll get the book 24 hours before they show up. It'll come in the mail.
The publisher just doesn't get it to you on time.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. But my gambit has always been that if you talk to writers and you find out who they are as people, how they do the work, where they come from, why they do the work. I always say it's like mostly biography and craft rather than like a rehashing of plot or some sort of literary theory discussion, which has its place. I don't think I'm the best person to do that kind of show.
Right.
I think there are other people who do it just fine as is. And so I'm actually interested in them as people.
Yeah.
And who they are as artists and how they got there. And I feel like if a listener hears that and connects with that person and what they're saying about their life, they're just as likely, if not more likely, to buy the book than if we sat down and picked apart the plot. And I also feel like if you take a conversation and you limit it to the book, or you make that the central focus, you're excluding a huge number of listeners, most of whom haven't had a chance to read. It's hard to listen to a conversation about a book that you haven't read.
And then there's the whole spoiler thing, whether you care about spoilers or not. I don't, but then it always is in the back of my mind. Someone might complain, or the author themselves might not want to reveal a spoiler. It's a real hornet's nest to actually talk about the book, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't like it. I mean, like, as a listener, it's not my favorite thing to hear is 2 people talking about a book, unless it's a book that I've read and I feel confused by.
Right.
I'm kind of the same way with book reviews. I don't love book reviews unless I've read the book and I don't know what to think about it and I want to like go back and read somebody's thoughts to try to clarify my own. I don't like to read a book review and then use that as a launching pad to go get a book. I tend 95% of the time to find book reviews really unsatisfying and formulaic.
It's true. I mean, I think that's many a book reviewer would agree that they've turned in their fair share of formulaic reviews.
Well, I mean, I don't want to sound dickish because I think, I mean, look, there's a place for criticism. There are great critics. Like I always, when I read a great review, I'll almost always tend to share it or, I don't know, pick up the book. There are certain reviewers who I will always read. Lydia Kiesling is one of them. I feel like the best reviewers, their reviews go beyond a review and deviate and feel more like an essay to me.
You want to read her mind interacting with a book and you want to see the product of that, not about
it's
her
almost not about the
evaluation.
book.
Yeah, but it's the book sparks her mind in action, and that's what you want to see.
It's
right?
really good. As opposed to, here's what I'm saying. Here's, I think, the crux of it. Okay, as opposed to painting with too broad a brush and saying that 95% of book reviews suck, because that might be too, it might be too harsh. What I'm saying is that, like, I don't like the reviews that say, I liked it, I liked it, I liked it, but here are the parts of it that sucked.
Right.
That's the way most reviews tend to read to me.
The standard structure.
Yeah,
yes.
it's like, it's great, it's great, it's less great, it's less great. This part sucked, and then you're like left feeling like you don't know what to feel, or just, I don't know. It leaves me feeling sort of wanting.
I think there's a lot of truth here to your core point, whether it's about reading reviews or whether it's about reading books. I mean, so much of the selection for me, just personally as a reader of either form, if I pick up a book, it's about who wrote it most of the time, and do I want to sort of engage with this person, with this author? If I read an article, most of the time it's about who wrote it, and do I want to sort of engage with the latest product of their mind tackling a subject? I mean, there's some people who would consider this illegitimate, like a book should stand by itself. Don't worry who wrote it. The book is the object you're dealing with. But I feel like we all, on some level, we all know that it's about who we want to read, not what we want to read. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I feel like there's so much content coming at all of us every day, 24/7. It can be hard to parse, and so when you find a mind or you find a person who really does it for you, and has a great brain, you tend to remember them and go back to the well.
Right. I mean, has there been an instance on other people where you've had somebody sitting here in the garage or in the old location in the apartment, and you talk to them, and talking to them made you very quickly devour their work? You felt like you had to go read everything they wrote, whether or not you completed all of that reading right away? I mean, was there any early conversation maybe, that just sent you straight into their bibliography?
Yeah, I mean, there's been many.
So it happens often.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and then there's also people, just because of the busy nature of life, who I feel a really strong connection with, and their work goes on like the to-read list. There's been so many. David Shields, I remember feeling that way after I talked to Cheryl Strayed. This was right when Wild was coming out, and I'd actually read that and really responded to it. And yeah, and then Chelsea Hodson, Luke B. Goebel, had great conversations with them and really connected. Megan Daum was another one. I had Rick Barthelme on the show. These are the kinds of people that when you finish talking to them, you feel more whole or something. And I definitely probably read anything they wrote.
Do you like writers as a group? I mean, are writers the people you get along with the best? Or do you conceive of writers even as a coherent group with traits in common?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're my tribe, for better or worse, mostly for better. And I definitely feel a kinship with people who try to do this. I mean, it's a crazy thing to try to do.
Now, what makes it crazy?
Oh, just, to try to make a living at it is definitely crazy.
And when we say writers, do we mean novelists? Do we mean literary fiction writers? What are we talking
above.
about?
I feel, because I feel a kinship with people who try to write fiction. I feel a kinship with people who try to write long-form nonfiction. I feel a real kinship with journalists. I think journalism's like a big part of, I have a lot of affection for journalists, and I think that their work is incredibly noble and underappreciated, or most, often underappreciated.
It's there is that. There's also, it's strange. I'm of two minds about journalism, because I agree with you. And then there's also, I think it's maybe the history of Hollywood movies where journalists went to go work for the studios writing scripts, and they wrote a lot of movies ennobling journalists. So I feel like both, A, I hold journalism in high regard, and B, I feel like I resent being told to hold journalism in high regard at the same time. Have you had that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that I hold really good journalists in high regard.
The profession itself, I mean, it's good, neither good nor bad to my mind, but good journalists are quite good indeed.
Yes.
Who do you like journalism-wise?
Oh my God, I read a lot of political journalism. I would say right now that Elizabeth Brunig at the New Republic is like one of my favorite young journalists. She's a brilliant writer, brilliant mind, and she's like no more than like 24 or 25 years old. And she's been writing, like, her beat is like poverty and inequality and religion, all of which, fascinate me. And her stuff's just really good. And I think the work that she does is the kind of work that I was just talking about.
Now, I should bring up a fact that's obvious, but it's another reason why I wanted to talk to you, because you are, of course, focused on the Los Angeles, shall we say, writer community. I mean, this is a show obviously based here in Los Angeles, in your garage. You talk to Los Angeles-based writers for the most part. I mean, is it, how much of a theme to you is the city in your show? It comes up quite often, but are you thinking about asking these writers questions that sort of root the interview geographically in Los Angeles? Because you talk about the Los Angeles writer community, you talk about events that go on here, you talk to people who live here. But how deliberate is that? Or is it just a byproduct of where you are?
A little bit of both. I mean, I think it's more important now because I've shifted to only doing in-person interviews. I used to do phoners, and I'm trying to stay away from that just because I think the sound quality is a little bit better. The conversation is a little bit more dynamic if you're in person with somebody, and it's just more fun for me. With that in mind, you tend to book more authors who live around here because they can get here. But the truth is, of the almost 400 episodes of the show, a lot of the people aren't from Los Angeles. They're from New York, mostly, because that's where most writers, tend to live, or they're from the East Coast somewhere. And they come out here, and it's just that natural conversation that I actually need to stop having because it's beaten to death. But it's like, how do you feel about LA, being from New York, and what's it like to live in Brooklyn, and all that kind of stuff. And, that particular conversation probably, could be done away with, or at least toned down significantly. But I do think that there is increasingly, in my mind anyway, a lot of emphasis placed on Los Angeles and the fact that I'm here, and especially the fact that I'm here as a literary person, because there is a really vibrant literary community in Los Angeles, but it's obviously not, it's not Brooklyn. And it can be easy to feel when you're out here like you're removed, and you're out on the frontier or something. And, I guess that set of circumstances is interesting.
Why did you come out here in the first place? I know you mentioned every so often that you were born and raised in the Midwest. What brought you to Los Angeles? Just besides the sort of fact that Midwesterners coming to Los Angeles has been such a theme in U.S. history for the past 100 years.
Graduate school.
I
went to USC for graduate school, and just didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, I'll go to grad. Just to see, why does anybody go to graduate school?
For writing?
Yeah. So went there, wound up here, met my wife here, and I look up and I've suddenly lived here for over 15 years.
Is the city itself an interesting subject to you? It is to me, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. LA is a really interesting place to live. It's not the easiest place to live. I'm sure there are places where it's simpler, and from a cost of living perspective and from a logistical perspective, traffic-wise and otherwise. But, a lot happens here. And like I always say on the show, I think what makes Los Angeles to me, most unique is the fact that the creative arts are the number one business in town. I think they're the number one. It's like the joke is always like, it's like the creative arts and weapons.
Right. Yes. There's some aerospace there. I guess, there used to be tire factories back in the day.
Right.
But I know what you mean.
That gives it a unique identity in the world, and it's a place that makes me feel at home in a way that other cities don't.
For me, a lot of it is even ruling out the types of industries that are here, just the general ambition in the air. I feel like maybe this is a quality of cities, no matter where they are, big cities no matter where, but when you feel the ambition that's just ambient in Los Angeles, you can't do without it anymore. Have you felt that?
Yeah, it can be toxic.
It can be? I like it. I gotta feel it. What are your bad moments with the ambition in the air here?
I don't know. I guess I have a complicated relationship with ambition and achievement and competition, all of it. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's good, and if it brings out the best in people, myself included. I also worry because I'm not a hugely competitive person. What do people always say? I'm competitive with myself. I want to do well, but I'm not a killer. And some people Like I've had people on my show where they're like tracking the literary awards and who's winning what. And like they admit to this.
That's
like,
what a killer writer does?
Well, that's just what people who probably succeed in any field do.
I see.
And if you don't have that, it can be a little bit worrying because I feel like it might be inherent. I don't know if it's something you can cultivate or if it's something you're born with. But, it seems like in America especially, we celebrate people, just to use, a more direct example, would be like sports heroes.
Right.
Like we celebrate the star quarterback or the Michael Jordan. Like Michael Jordan, perfect example. This is a guy who's known generally as the greatest basketball player who ever lived, probably the greatest athlete in any sport from a success standpoint that we've had in America in the last 40 years, maybe ever. And then if you read about him, he's like a psychopath.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be anywhere near him.
I'm like, this is it. This is what we, this is what we hold up as like, what we should all be aiming for. That's what I mean. Like, right. I feel like when you peel back those layers, it's like, yeah, he's got the trophies, but how did he treat people? And is he happy? And I don't know.
What does he think of himself? Does he, in Michael Jordan's mind, is he...
Oh, I think he thinks he's fine.
Well, he may or may not. I mean, I actually wonder, like, does he act that way because he regards himself as the king of the world? Or because, like... Or is it out of sort of a lack of self-respect? Like, am I really taking advantage of humanity as much as I can? Like, what is a successful person supposed to do? Sometimes I feel like that about people who are really very successful. Like they're not sure how to play the role of a successful person. So sometimes it's just like, well, maybe a successful person is just a dick. Maybe I should be that.
I mean, and you could use another example. It's like politics, because so often people sacrifice principle on the altar of victory in politics, and America loves a winner. And it's true, like you have a principled candidate who has a very consistent track record over the entire course of his or her career. And then you have the triangulating candidate who will basically say anything to win. And the one that the history books tend to record as the great winner is the one who sacrifices principle on the altar of victory and does whatever it takes to win.
Right.
That seems to be like an American value. And maybe it's like a human value, but I'm not sure it's a good value. And I don't know if I'm clear on that. And that's what I mean when I talk about competitiveness and ambition, and especially in the creative classes. Like I've had people on this show who are one way, like they track the awards and they're very competitive and they want to be the best and they pay attention to who's winning out there in the marketplace and they want to be, and then I've had people on this show like Bud Smith who, he has like this great attitude about just making art every day and being a creative person and doing it because it nourishes your soul. And I don't mean to, I hope I'm not diminishing it or making it sound like something silly, because it's really not. Like you can listen to my interview with him. Like the guy is just salt of the earth and has a great attitude about everything. And I think my tendency is to believe that a person like that is maybe more successful, quote unquote, when it comes to art and their approach to art than somebody who, is super hyper competitive. And here's the other thing. I could ramble on this about all day because this is something that I'm really fixated on. When it comes to competition, there's a winner and a loser, and the loser tends to feel bad. And like I know in life, I guess sometimes you got to feel bad, and there has to be a winner and a loser. I don't like that though. Doesn't make me happy to know that.
I mean, what in life? Did you play sports growing up or anything?
Yes, in a very mediocre way.
So after the sports got done, do you feel like you've lost in life at anything?
Sure.
What's a loss that's not, when you're not playing a game with rules, just living life, doing your thing? What counts to you as a loss?
Oh, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, that's the game that's the problem, is to try to figure out what constitutes winning and losing, what constitutes success and failure. And I think people need to define that for themselves. I think doing the best that you can, like doing your best to make the most of what you've got and giving that effort. And that's not just in a professional context. I think that's just across the board in life. Trying to be the best dad, trying to be the best husband, trying to be the best writer, trying to be the best podcaster that I can be with whatever I've got. If you give best effort in a sincere way, and I think at the end of the day, you can look yourself in the eye and say, I did everything I could. But if you don't give best effort, this is how I feel. If I don't give best effort, if I have a day where I slack or I do an interview that I don't feel like I was at my best in because I didn't prepare enough or I didn't have the right energy or I didn't meditate in the morning or whatever it is that I'll do to penalize myself, then I feel shitty.
I see. So when you're doing an interview here, whether this is going to be an interview that in your mind you win or you lose, that's determined the moment you hit record. It's determined by how you ran up to it, in a sense. How you prepared, as you say. Whether you did the yoga, whether you got in the right frame of mind, whether this is going to be a good or a bad interview, that's decided as soon as it begins.
Sometimes I can save one in the middle.
Oh yeah. What's your tact? What's your tact? This is an interview in some sense about the craft of the writer interview. What is your sort of Hail Mary tactic if you think the ship's going down in an interview? What can you bust out with that might turn things around, for example?
It varies, but I think just the humanizing. Like you can tell when you're having an honest conversation with somebody by, I always say it changes your body temperature. Mm-hmm. And it happens when you read something where you strike a note of truth or you read a note of truth and suddenly, you're a little bit more focused on the book that you're holding in your hands, or you're listening to an interview and suddenly, you roll the windows up in the car and turn the volume up, or you stop walking and sit down and listen on your earbuds or whatever it is. But it's those moments in the middle of the conversation where I can sometimes feel like, okay, this thing is turning. And usually it has something to do with the person's personal existence. And it's not always the same. I will ask questions about a person's spiritual existence, and I use that word loosely. I don't necessarily mean religion. I mean just like, how do you cope with the inevitability of death? What do you think is going to happen when we die?
You go straight to the void.
Sure.
Why not?
Why not? To me, that's really the thing. And at the end of it all, right? What else is there? And we're all dealing with it, and we rarely talk about it, it seems like. And it's on my mind all the time.
There's a simple question you often ask on other people that I notice every time because I don't usually ask it. It is the one-word interjection, just why. Someone will say something and you'll just simply ask why. Now, is that a natural move for you in conversation, or does it feel like you're sort of making a play there? Because I always hesitate to just say why after somebody said something, because I feel like I can't pull it off without sounding like I'm accusing them of not having explained themselves enough, if that makes any sense. Tell me about the why and how you use it.
It's just natural. And I feel like it's anticipating whatever. I'm always trying to anticipate what I think my listeners are going to be asking in their own minds as they listen. And if why is the question, then I'll spit it out.
Right. You're speaking for whatever people are going to be like, oh, the guest is not really explaining themselves fully. You got to step in there and just force them in a way.
Yeah. It's like, there's like those, they're not really tricks, but I think when you're talking to somebody asking why and encouraging people to go deeper when you feel like they could or should. The other thing too is just to be quiet. Like Terry Gross is great at this.
Right.
She just hangs on for a second. And if you hang on for a second, usually the person will expound a bit more.
It's true. There's a filmmaker I know we both admire, Errol Morris, who has a saying about this. He says, you just let somebody talk for 10 minutes, you'll realize how crazy they really are. He just keeps silent for long stretches in his interviews, as I understand it. And people come out with, as you'll see in his movies, just things you never would expect. I'm always hesitant to do that because they'll feel like I'm supposed to say something. But if you let the silence drop for a little while, they always pick it up, right? No one ever reacts.
Well, you don't want to torture people with it. You don't want to, you don't want to just go completely mute and because then people, I think, sometimes will get nervous and just start blabbing because they want to fill the void. Silence can be uncomfortable. It's not about discomfort for me. It's more about giving people space to think and compose their thoughts and, hopefully, clarify and add to whatever it is that they had been saying previously. So, hopefully judiciously applied, it can be a good thing. And it's not something that I'm using to like manipulate the situation in a dark way. It's really just to make the conversation go deeper.
Tell me something you've learned, or anything you've learned, or how this sort of intellectual landscape looks to you of why writers write, right? Why these 400 writers you've talked to? Are there any patterns, anything that surprised you about why they're writing in the first place? Why they've gone into that vocation?
I think it's like a mental illness. I think I really believe the need to write, and people who are writers, it's like the Lori Moore line. It's like, try to do something else, and if you still can't not write, then you're a writer.
That's the last resort. You're forced to.
Yeah, but just like you can go try to be a salesman, try to do anything else. Open a bar, do whatever. And if you're still writing, if you're still getting up at 5 a.m, or you're still on the bus scribbling in a notebook, then you have whatever it is that makes somebody a writer. And there's no turning it off, really. And I think everybody who I've spoken with, who publishes books, has that to greater and lesser extents. And I don't know where that comes from. It's not necessarily a bad, it's not a bad thing. I use mental illness somewhat jokingly. It's like half joke, half serious. But I think that what I've learned about why people do it is, what's the Joan Didion? I mean, not to sound too precious, but Joan Didion, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. It's a way to get through life. It's a way to make sense of a crazy world. That's it. It's medicinal in some way, but it's also can be a pain in the ass.
Do you have a sense that different generations of writers approach writing differently? You talk to writers of a variety of ages, and I want to get an idea of whether you think that the difference between generations is over or understated in terms of writers. How they're thinking about things, how they're doing their work, all that sort of thing.
How they're doing their work, I don't think changes too much. I mean, I guess maybe you could use. I have a friend who wrote her book on Siri, just like talking it into her phone. So, there may be methodologies or something that would change with changing technology. There may be something that the internet does to the way in which books are composed or something. But, ultimately it comes down to sitting by yourself, staring at a flashing cursor and writing the book. So,
got to put the words there sooner or later.
Yeah. And then, so the how doesn't change. I don't think the why changes all that much. I think maybe the what changes depending on, generationally speaking, depending on the world that you're born into.
Right.
I think being born after 1985 and growing up online is a different childhood than I had. Like, I had one of the last analog.
I was born in 84. I just made it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I had like one of the last analog childhoods. I didn't. My life is bifurcated in that way. But I think it's inevitable that people would have a different way of approaching the world and a different way of relating to other people. If imagine being born in 2000. You're 15 years old now, and you've always known a social media world. Social media is how you've always interacted with people closest to you, and that's a different beast.
It is. Do you feel to some extent uncomfortable in the social media landscape? Why? I just did the why there.
Yeah. No, it's a good. I feel like the best kind of relationship is an in-person relationship with a very small social media component. And I feel like the worst kind, I don't know, not the worst kind, but I feel like, I don't know, I just feel a little bit depressed about the idea of everybody interacting over their computers instead of actually hanging out. I think actually hanging out is way better.
It's a theme that's come up in conversations on other people, this like the disappearance of hanging out, right? Yeah,
and maybe it's easy to kind of idealize the past. It's more logistically difficult, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where you got to get in your car, and there's something to be said for the convenience of texting and the convenience of tweeting and letting people know. But I think there's a lot of loneliness at the heart of it, and I think also it gets into like there's something about the curation of lifestyle that you see on like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, where people are showing you vacation photos or like the nice restaurant that they're at, and this is my dessert, and look at how great my life is. And there's an element.
You don't have to follow these people. That's your choice.
They can be your friends, and you're like, oh God. And it's like this weird, like, competitive. It gets back to the competitive thing about how we want to present ourselves online.
Right.
We present some version of ourselves that we want other people to believe, and that can make me feel icky, because it's like I'm not getting the real thing, and I don't know who people are, and do people actually know me? And I don't know. It just makes me feel uncomfortable a lot of the time.
Do you suspect the sort of born in 2000s you mentioned? Do you suspect what they put online is the real thing?
Some people it is. I mean, but it's inevitable that, like, the thing about it too is that social media sort of employs or is like tailor-made for the language of advertising, which I think we all are completely fluent in because it's the world we live in. And so it's just sort of like
the air we breathe.
It's the air we breathe, and it's the perfect medium for personal advertisement. And then we know, and we sort of subconsciously know that language going in, and it's amazing to watch people use it to self-promote and to self-curate, and it's just like seamless. And I think my favorite people on social media to follow are the ones that feel the most unvarnished.
Yes, I think that's true for a lot of people. Even the 15-year-olds, they like the unvarnished, but to the extent they can find it.
Yeah, I mean, and to the extent that, like, sometimes like unvarnishedness can be a performance that's very varnished. It's like it can be hard to peel it apart.
What's that saying? Sincerity. You can fake that, you got it made.
You know, and
if you think too hard about this, it really you go into a spiral, I would think.
In a perfect world, I would not participate.
Right.
I have fantasies, as I think a lot of people do, about just like getting rid of all of it and reading books more and just having my friends and talking to them on the phone, texting with them to make plans, and then like hanging out and getting coffee.
If you could shift your life and career back 30 years, would you do it?
I don't think like that. I mean, again, it's easy to kind of idealize the past. I can have fantasies about like the mid 19th century, you know, and be like, oh my God, the transcendentalists, and everyone was so learned, and like you can read like letters from Civil War soldiers, you know, like have you ever seen the Civil War documentary by Ken Burns?
Yes, I saw that in school.
Yeah, where they're like, you know, the narrator's reading, or they have people reading these letters, and you're like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. This is just a casual letter from like soldier to wife or whatever.
Yes.
It seemed like people, you know, it's easy to believe based on that people were just way smarter back then, and that education was different, and they were book learning, and they weren't, you know, they weren't watching TV and, you know, sitting in front of a computer all day long. And so, I mean, there's a part of me that, you know, has fantasies about completely removing myself from all of it, unplugging and leading a very analog kind of slow food existence. But I think there's probably a happy medium, and I think that my behavior and my ability to kind of discipline my behavior has a big part of it, you know, because I say all this and I'm on social media constantly. if you, and then this is, I don't think all that uncommon, you know, bitching about social media, yet checking your Twitter feed like 100 times a day. And I think it's a recognition of the compulsivity of it, and a recognition of the, like, a recognition of the fact that, like, it doesn't make me feel good to go on Facebook or Twitter. It rarely does. Sometimes I'll get a laugh, but usually what it is like this weird undercurrent of anxiety. And that's what I feel, and that's what I'm sort of like stoking by going and checking it. And I need to, it's like feeding it, you know?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I ask that would you go back 30 years thing because I've heard various writers of various ages sort of pine for an earlier time when, to their minds, it was simpler to be a writer. If you got in the game, you didn't have to, there was no social media, no doing any of that. I mean, I think of the movie, did you see this film by the director of The Color Wheel? It was called Listen Up, Philip.
Yes.
You saw it?
Yeah. Is that the one with
Jason Schwartzman as the sort of a writer, like an Updike or a Roth, but like he's in his 30s, like now.
Yeah.
It transplants that sensibility of a career into the present. Social media is never mentioned, and in a way the movie feels like wishful thinking in its very construction, but also it's a satire on some of these younger writers who wish, like, why can't I have John Updike's exact career? Why can't I have Philip Roth's career? And part of me is like, I get it, you know, you want to have, who doesn't want to be an icon? I guess there's complications to that as well, but also I think, like, why do you want a career that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago? Like, there are exciting things now. Why are you grasping for sort of what people were limited to doing, what writers were limited to doing in the past? Does that make sense? Like, it feels sad.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, I think you can be overly obsessed with it. I think it's also healthy to know the past, to know history is important.
Sure.
To have a rootedness in literary history, if you're going to be a writer, is important. I don't think there's necessarily enough of that. And I'm not completely innocent in that regard. I could obviously read more. I think everybody feels like that. So I think it is important to know the past and to have like a certain regard for history. But I think if that's all you're interested in, and you're not a historian, and you're trying to be a writer of literary fiction who is speaking to readers today, it's going to be pretty hard to succeed.
Do you think the sort of you read this occasionally? Someone will say, this world of social media, we're in instant connectivity, very, very rapid travel, all that. It makes it hard to set a story in the present because it's hard to tell what we regard as a story in a world where everybody is constantly connected to one another. Do you buy that? Do you buy that if you want to write a novel in the way we've come to know novels, you've kind of got to go into the past, you've got to excise certain parts of today's reality?
I don't know.
Or you got to reinvent the novel to conform to accommodate today's reality?
I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think you have to reinvent. I mean, I think the novel gets reinvented every time somebody writes one to a degree. And I think that if you're writing a novel that's set in the present, then, or, whatever approximation of the present that you're trying to lay down, then it's your subjective view of it. I don't think that, I think forms can change. People can play with form in a novel. I think that, see, this is why I don't talk about like literary theory and stuff. I don't think
that's why you ask about where they grew up.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I just think that the basic nuts and bolts of it, the fundamentals of writing a novel don't change from era to era. I think it's always the same challenge. It's, and it's not that old. I mean, what is it? It goes back to the 19th century.
Yeah, when was Clarissa? That's generally regarded as the first novel. It's older than that, I think.
Then there's the Japanese story, which is considered like the first. But I mean, like in terms of like
the Tale of Genji, yeah,
the Tale of Genji. So it's like but in popular conception, I'm remembering something. Maybe it was like the Reality Hunger, where I think he's sort of like saying, "Hey, this is a relatively new thing." I could be misremembering, but the point, I guess, is that anytime you sit down to write any kind of book or tell any kind of long form story, I think the fundamentals are the same.
Is there something is there a particular thing you would want to know from every writer, no matter who it is? Is there one element of their life or career you're always going to be curious about, no matter who?
I think I'm interested in. I've been tending to ask people what they think is going to happen when we die.
Right, so back to death we come. I mean, in terms of, is there an afterlife? Is there not an afterlife?
I like to bring that question up just because I'm like, okay, because it just seems like the last thing you would ever ask somebody, and I like to ask it, not necessarily first, but just let's bring it out. Let's kind of start there, and then we'll work from there, or something like that.
Let's find out your position on death, and then we can talk.
Yes. Yeah, like let's get real. I've been wanting to ask people about when they lost their virginity, but I haven't gotten to it yet. Maybe I'll start doing that.
Do you have to work that in, you think, organically? Or is that better dropped in suddenly?
Well, that's the thing, is that it can be, you start asking people about their sexual histories or whatever, and I don't want to come off seeming creepy or something, but
right.
That's a fascinating.
But if they bring it up first,
well, then
you've got a hit episode on your hands, my friend.
It's gold. But it's like that kind of stuff, big stuff in life. What do you think is going to happen when you die? When did you lose your virginity? Did you go through any significant losses as a person, as a child? Did you get along with your parents? It's like I want to know who they are as people. I want to connect, and I feel like if I can connect in the room when I'm doing the interview, then I think the listener will be able to connect.
For those authors who you had been reading before you interviewed them, is it mostly the case that they have the personalities and the life stories you expect, or are you more often surprised by them, just from the image you had put together from reading their work?
Oh, it depends. I mean, if you read somebody, you tend to get a pretty good sense of them, especially if it's a memoir, but even if it's a novel. It's weird, people rarely surprise me. That's what, even people you meet on social media or only know via social media, if you spend any amount of time reading their Twitter or their Facebook and then you meet them in person, I find that they're very rarely surprising.
People sometimes ask me whether I use notes or not in an interview, and you can see that I don't. Because if I look down even once at notes, the conversation is broken and can never be recovered. That's my fear, anyway. And they ask me if I write questions beforehand. I don't. I just know the first one, sometimes not even that, and go from there. I feel like you might be a bit the same way, or maybe even more so, that it needs to be improvisational for you. If it's not improvisational, it dies.
The less I prepare, the better.
Really, just linearly, the less preparation. So you would have a writer that you haven't heard of at all.
Yeah.
They sit down here. What do you ask this writer you've never seen, never heard of, don't know anything? What do you ask?
I mean, I don't want to diminish my own show, and I certainly don't want to diminish the many fine writers who have been on the show, but I almost, I tend to feel like you could bring somebody in off the street and sit them down across from me, and I'd have a fine time talking to that person for an hour.
Does that extend to the rest of your social life? Like you're at a party, you don't know anybody, you can just talk, you'll have a good time? Did you cultivate that skill, or is it an inborn skill?
This is an inborn skill I have. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, look, I'm not like the life of any party.
Right.
I'm not like the guy with the lampshade on his head. But
that guy's great.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I have been once or twice, but it's not my natural, it's not my natural role. But I can talk to strangers. Mm. I can talk to people. And I like to talk to people. I'm fascinated by people. And I like to connect with people. That thrills me.
You're the Forster only connect school of thought, yes? The E.M. Forster quote, only connect, often brought up, and this sounds like you too.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't want superficial exchanges with people in any capacity, whether it's as the host of my podcast or in this conversation or in any conversation I have. That makes me feel lonely. And it makes me feel like I'm wasting my time. And it's just, who wants that? Who wants to spend their life having superficial conversations? And so I'm not big into small talk. I love to laugh. So, it's not like I'm at the party and I'm like, what do you think's going to happen when you die?
That could work. Keep it in the back pocket as a potential gambit.
I'll joke around, but I do like to draw people out. And I like to be, and when I say draw people out, I think a lot of the way, I don't want to misrepresent what I'm talking about, because it's not just some sort of seduction where like I don't show my cards and I somehow get you to show yours, like some sort of snake charmer or something. What tends to be the case is that you lead by being candid first.
Lead by example.
Yeah, well, yeah, you open up, and then people open up because people want that, and most people do anyway. And so maybe I'm better at taking the plunge first. Than the average person, or I'm just like, it's a compulsion with me, but I like to talk to somebody and then, immediately kind of set things on a human footing.
Do you talk to many strangers outside this show?
As many as I can. I mean, I'm busy with my family and, I'm not out. In Los Angeles, you're in your car. You're not on the subway, and you're not.
I'm on the subway, my friend.
Yeah, you are. But I mean,
bike.
Yeah, you don't have a car. But I mean, like most people are in their cars, or you're on your bike, and if you're on your bike, you're not chatting, and
right.
It just depends.
Listening to podcasts like other people on their bike.
Yeah, well,
I guess the car people do that too.
They do too, and so even if you're on the subway, though, like it's not all the time that you have a conversation with people. I think if there's more street level action, or if you're out, I don't know. You're just out and about and you're shopping or you're talking to people, like, yeah, I mean, you'll mix more. But for me, it's like the people at Trader Joe's. I talk to them all the time.
I was literally going to ask in line at Trader Joe's, are you the guy talking?
Well, hopefully not in an annoying way.
Right.
But I like to mess with people a little bit or joke around with people.
You enliven your day and theirs. I mean, when I don't necessarily do that, but I try to keep in mind this premise that I can learn something and probably a lot of things from everybody. My mission is to find out what that thing is. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think for me, it might be just like, let's just make sure that this person's day is a little bit better for having interacted with me.
Right. Like, don't make it worse. Do no harm.
Do no harm. First, do no harm. And, I don't know. I mean, it's not like that calculated. I think if I'm just standing next to somebody, I tend to try to make a joke. That's my thing. And if it's there. Other days I'm just like catatonic and I don't have it in me, and then I just like, don't talk to me.
Do you nevertheless tell your kids not to talk to strangers? I mean, the second kid is still quite young, but you have an older child as well.
No, I don't say that.
No?
No.
I'm glad that day is that day over in parenting that don't talk to strangers?
It's a little paranoid. I mean, and you don't want to instill like some sort of crazy irrational fear in a kid. I mean, you want them to have common sense, and we'll get there. But like, don't talk to strangers seems a little bit too broad.
You didn't get that growing up, did you? The don't talk to strangers?
Sure. And it was like, don't get in the car.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I remember like there was the whole Adam Walsh thing for people of my generation, like.
Of course, you were right in that window.
Right in that window. And it was like, oh my God, you got pulled from a shopping cart or whatever it was. And, it's really scary. I remember being scared by it when I was a kid. And so that is something I would like to avoid with my own children, exposure to that sort of stuff as much as possible because... And this is another thing that I guess could tie back into what we were talking about with regard to social media, but just media in general, is that one of the things or one of the ideas that I've been sort of plagued by in recent times is this notion that media can be just as toxic as like drugs or anything, like anything we ingest. We often think of toxins in terms of like what we put into our bodies.
Trans fats, man.
Yeah.
You gotta keep those out of your body.
Yeah. It's
poisoning yourself.
High fructose corn syrup, but as a kid, I remember sort of bristling at the adults in my life who were telling me that I shouldn't watch violent movies or I shouldn't listen to NWA or any of this stuff. Like, it's like, we used to make fun of the parents who were like kumbaya and like didn't have the television and only let their kids listen to X, Y, and Z.
A lot of earth tones in those homes.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I don't think I'm going to go that far, but I think I've actually come around, or at least I'm toying with the idea of coming around to like these people have a point. And I think what we ingest from a media standpoint can be every bit as toxic as the more traditional toxins. And if you spend all day reading political news or news about war in Syria, or you're reading, you're looking at your Instagram of all these people on vacation while you're at home, like you're going to feel like shit.
Do you think Americans realize how gripped by fear and anxiety they are?
No.
Yeah, they don't, do they?
No, I mean, not all of them, but I think that the more the better. I mean, I think part of like, just awareness of the fact like, oh my God, I feel anxious. This is making me feel anxious, or that's what meditation is for me. I feel like I'm really bad at it, but I sit there every day, most days, twice a day, and I'm just like, oh my God, like I'm really anxious or pissed off, or I'm having like an argument with somebody that's completely, fictitious. It's not real, but I'm debating like my mom or something
in your head,
in my head. And like, you catch yourself doing that and you go to yourself, you go, oh, like this is my normal mode when I'm unconscious. This is happening all the time. And even if I didn't like slip into some sort of state of bliss, I at least became aware of this static that's going on. I became aware of how I feel, and that to me is valuable.
That's mindfulness, I guess, what they talk about.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sound preachy or ridiculous, but it's good for me.
We're just past Halloween, and you're a parent. I've got to ask you if this is still going on. Now, I was born in '84, as I said. I'm 31 years old today, as a matter of fact.
Today's your birthday?
Yeah, today's my birthday.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. But growing up in the 1990s, in my case, when Halloween came around, there was always this wave of fear that definitely strangers are putting razor blades into your candy, or razor blades into apples, and it's patently...
Or they're lacing pot.
Ridiculous. There's that too, but I mean, I always heard of the razor blade in the candy. Like, how are you going to get a razor blade in a Snickers bar? There's no documented instance of that even happening ever, but still, the parental fear was so strong, parents were ready to believe that strangers want to harm my children for no reason.
Yeah.
And so I remember there were stations you could go at, like school gyms, to have firemen scan your candy, to make sure there were no razor blades in it, that there's no recorded incident of ever happening. Like, that felt to me even then like, we've reached a peak of something bad here. Do you feel like, I mean, you're a parent now, there's still worries about razor blades and Halloween candy? Is America still that sort of...
Not for me. I mean, I'm worried about plenty when it comes to my kids. I mean, how can you not be as a parent? But, I think that those kinds of urban legends, and this is the thing too. I'm not a fan of singular instances of really bad shit being used to change behavior in mass.
Yes.
That bothers me.
Which is constantly happening.
No, it's like my parents were getting ready to go on a trip. Like they're retired, they're going to go over to Italy, and my mom was like, "Oh, I'm worried about there's just all this terrorism in the world," and I'm like, "No, like you go. First of all, you're going to Italy. Second of all, like if you start to think like that, you start to think like that, then the terrorists win.
Yes.
And I kind of do believe that. Like then they've got a grip on you, and they've got you got
That's
fear.
what they wanted.
They want fear. They want you to be afraid. And like I refuse to that's where I start to get like a little bit I become kind of a chest thumper. Like I refuse to participate in that. And I think that that may be like the more macro version of it. I think the micro version would be like razor blades and candy, or people, wasting their expensive drugs on lacing your pot, which seems crazy. Like who's lacing?
Why?
Yeah.
Why would they do it?
Drug dealers tend not to just give away their drugs, in my experience.
Now, do you think that reading literature is an effective treatment for this fear or anxiety? Is literature in and of itself curative? Connecting through literature? When is it? When does it work the best for you?
Well, I think it's when you're reading something that you really connect with, where you're getting into a person's interior that resonates with your interior.
What kinds of things are that for you, where you read them in books or authors or whatever, forums that you read, you think, I'm really, really locked in with this, or they're locked in with me?
Well, it's a mystical. Again, not to sound silly, but for me, it's hard to find a book that I lock in with.
Yeah.
Like I put down a lot of books because it's just not the right book. And I'm a big believer in reading only the things that really resonate. I don't like to, gut my way through a book just because everybody else read it and I think I should.
Right. Everybody else went through Life of Pi. I'll trudge through it as well.
If it's not for you, it's not for you. But if you find the books that are for you, that's the best joy, because you just tear through them and you think about them when you're not with them. And it's like this obsession, and like, it just feels like the food that you desperately need now. And to find a book like that is a great experience, because it feels like magic. It's like, oh, this is just what I needed at this time in my life for whatever reason. And I think it varies from time to time. I wish I had a better batting average in terms of finding those books. I think some of it is a function of time and being able to go to the bookstore and browse and try things and find. And, again, with young kids, it's not as simple as it used to be. But when I do find those books, it's super medicinal.
Is there anything you hope your kids get into reading? Any type of avenues literarily you hope to see them going down?
Yeah, paper books.
So the physical medium is important too.
It increasingly. Like I've gone back and forth on this, and I think like I have a Kindle app and I read books on, ebooks sometimes. So I'm not like a complete, I'm not completely orthodox or whatever, but I really think slow food is important when it comes to literature. And I think having the physical object and not having access to the internet and not looking at a screen is vital. What's wrong with the screen? For me, a lot of times it has access to the internet.
Oh, yeah,
so there's the risk of lateral movement.
This wasn't a problem in 1982 when it was just a green screen with characters on it. Nothing was there to do.
You can't concentrate. And to go back to meditation, which I think is, in addition to being more in touch with my own suffering or just being aware of how crazy I am, it also hopefully is helping me rebuild some of the wiring that's been broken down by constant screen time and multimedia, which completely destroys your ability to concentrate, which is precisely what's required to read a book. And so many of us, I hear people say all the time, it's harder and harder for me to get to read, to sit down, to be able to sit still. And you talk about mindfulness, like the opposite of mindfulness is forgetfulness. So you might be aware of where you are and the fact that you're alive right now and that you're breathing. And then it happened, all of a sudden, like you're lost in your thoughts and you're whisked away on this weird river of nonsense. And you find yourself imagining an argument with your mom or whatever. So you slip into forgetfulness and then you got to come back in. And I think another, an extension of forgetfulness is loss of concentration. You have to build up concentration in order to be a good reader. And I think that being a good reader builds up concentration. They're mutually reinforcing. You think your kids' generation is going to be better at this than we are? No, I think they're going to be worse. Worse. So they're not, because my theory, not that I actually have, but the theory I'll throw out here, is that maybe they're native to all this stuff. It won't
be such a novelty to them, and thus not quite as, in the early days of television, people would sit for hours at dumber things that are on TV today, if you know what I mean. Maybe it'll be like, again, the air they breathe. They won't be so intent on checking Twitter because Twitter will be long gone, and that was already there. It's taken for granted. That'll be there when I come back. You know what I mean?
I have a hard time believing. Like, 'cause, listen, I don't want to sound like one of these old people who's like, oh, the world is fucked, and like nothing's gonna, I don't want to be like that. I'm an optimist at heart, and I think you have to be, especially if you're a parent. Like, just being a parent is inherently optimistic.
Right.
And so I have hope for things to improve and for the world to be a better place in the future. That's certainly what I'm going to be, working on. To try to, hopefully the kids that I raise will be a part of helping to build that in whatever way. But I look to the future and I look at where things are technologically today, and I look at the market forces at work, and it just seems very hard for me to believe that my children's generation is not going to be more inundated with media. And the big thing that scares me is driverless cars, because I feel like this is the epiphany that I think maybe some people had a long time ago, but is really taking hold among businesses and capitalists today. It's like, man, if we can get people to stop driving, we can put screens in that car and just advertise to them.
You're afraid of the screens
all day long. It's just, think about it.
Like in cabs, screens are there.
You're a captive audience,
right?
Think about how many hours of advertising could be sold if people didn't have to actively drive their cars to work,
right? And
people would be online. People would be watching Netflix. People would be tweeting or whatever. Like, they will just be in their car. I'm just picturing this world where they're in their cars and there's just like a flat screen on every wall of the car and on the ceiling, and like, that's probably excessive, but maybe not too.
Well, you can see a little bit in Korea, where I'm moving next week. On the subway, everyone's got their phone out. They're doing something on those phones, be it games, be it watching TV, be it sometimes reading books. I don't know, but same deal.
Why? Because you know why? People dive into their phones because they don't want to be alone with themselves. They don't want to touch their own suffering. They don't want to be in touch with it. They don't want to hear their own thoughts, and they want that dopamine shot of like a Twitter like, or a text message from a friend or whatever. But to sit still and to be quiet is deeply uncomfortable for most people.
So do you drive around? No, nothing on in the car?
Yes.
Just the air?
I try. I'm not the wind. I don't bat 1,000, but like increasingly, yeah.
Where's your mind go in those drives?
I'm trying to stay. When I do it that way, I'm trying to just be like, okay, I'm driving and I'm looking around and I'm alive and I'm driving my car. Does this sound ridiculous?
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Because I don't drive a lot, but I know what you mean.
But it's like, because you get in the car and it's like I'm constantly resisting the urge and often failing to check my phone while driving, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
And then, and by the way, I don't do that when I have my kids in the car. Unless I'm completely stopped at a red light.
Yeah, your foot's on the brake. You're probably fine.
Yeah, on the brake, red light. But it's an annoying compulsion. Oh, what the fuck has happened in my life in the 10 minutes it takes me to drive to the grocery store that I've got to be checking my phone 3 times en route? It's ridiculous.
Right.
It's ridiculous, but it's like an addiction.
You feel like you're expected to on some level too. Like, somebody will think I'll see this soon if they sent me a message, so I got to look.
It's the forgetfulness. It's like the slipping into, and it's also like that discomfort. Like, it's this weird, like, to me, it sort of manifests like a weird kind of subterranean knot in my solar plexus. It's that discomfort. It's that block of suffering or whatever it is that exists in all of us. And you start to feel it, and you go, oh, I'm going to dive into my phone. Let's forget about this. Let's run away from this. Let's not pay attention. And I think that the sad irony of that is that it doesn't actually alleviate suffering. In the long run, it exacerbates it. I think you have to go into it in order to get out of it.
What's some type of suffering that doing the conversations on other people has alleviated, or something you've come to understand better about life from all these conversations, or something that's changed about you after these 400 or so interviews? What has the experience helped with, do you think?
It's hugely nourishing. Like, you have a good conversation with somebody and you really connect. And that could be in the context of the podcast, or it could be just anywhere in life. It always makes you feel good to connect with another person. I think, just the obvious one is that it makes you feel less alone. Like, not only in terms of actually being in a room with somebody and sitting down and having an IRL conversation, but also just oh, I'm not the only one who struggles with this. Oh, I'm not the only one who's been through loss. Oh, I'm not the only one who doesn't know what happens when we die and is sort of freaked out by that or whatever it is, And so that's one thing, that you learn. I think you also, I've gotten a fairly clear picture of the kinds of writers and artists who tend to be happiest in their lives.
What's something about them?
Well, insofar as writers go, I boiled it down to three things. It's like read a lot, write like with discipline pretty much every day, and don't do it for money. Those are the rules that I've sort of given to myself. Like, you have to read a lot. Most of us don't. I need to read more.
But that's the metabolism. That's how it works. You take in the text, you put out your own text,
Precisely.
but without the input, there's no output.
Precisely. And it's like the most elemental thing, and yet we forget. And it's like, God, I don't have any inspiration. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to write about. And it's like, well, what have you read lately?
Right.
It's directly proportional.
Shrug. I read Twitter is what I read.
Exactly. And so
Or
like
my ad
maybe
replies.
that's enough for some people to like generate, but they must be following some amazing tweeters.
They must certainly be. Do you think finally this question comes to mind? That's why podcasts where people talk, whether it's your show, whether it's the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast, or the hundreds of thousands of far less formal shows, people just gabbing. Do you think that's why they're popular? Is these are the conversations we miss actually participating in, so at least we can get them in our earbuds?
Yeah, no, and I think it functions. I just said this on a monologue recently, that I think it functions in a way that's not dissimilar from good literature in terms of giving you access to another person's consciousness. Like their inner world, their inner thoughts. I think maybe literature can go deeper just because of form. You can really dive deep in a book in a way that maybe in an hour-long podcast or a half an hour-long podcast you can't. But there are many interviews that I've conducted that I feel like go real deep and have moments of real profundity. And there are podcasts that I listen to where that's the experience, and you have that feeling of it changes your temperature. You feel warm inside. It feels nourishing. And I think the same thing happens when you read a good book, and it's medicine.
Well, listeners, you can get your temperature changed. You can connect to the consciousnesses of a variety of other people.
And by the way, I should say I'm very caffeinated. I hope I don't sound too, confident in my own opinions.
No, you're good, man. I agree with what you're saying, and that's why I'm telling the listeners what to do. They gotta connect to all these other people on Other People, which is the podcast by my guest today, Brad Listi. He is both a podcaster and a writer, and the founder of the literary culture site, The Nervous Breakdown. You can keep your finger on the pulse of literary culture if you keep up with that site, but also by listening to Other People. Also, take a read of his novel Attention Deficit Disorder. That's his first one. He's working on a second one whose progress you can keep up with by listening to the monologues on Other People. How's that going, by the way?
Well, it's going well this week. It's a very slow process. It's a very slow birth, to use that analogy, but I'm sticking with it.
A vivid analogy for you, given recent second child events.
All too vivid.
Brad, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
This has been the Los Angeles Review of Books podcast. I've been Colin Marshall. Keep up with me at colinmarshall.org or with the LARB at lareviewofbooks.org. Thanks.